I'm interested in the humans feeling acknowledged and honored and witnessed. And how do we do that for educators so that they can fill themselves up and then do that with and for students?
Hello, Montgomery County. This is Brandon Langer with the OPL Podcast, a new offering from the MCIU Office of Professional Learning. Today, we have a terrific program lined up for you with two of our wonderful consultants in the Office of Professional Learning and our special guest, Shavon Norris. I'll let everybody take a minute, introduce themselves, and then we'll kick it off.
Hi, everyone. I am Jesse Gluckman. I am a project consultant in the Office of Professional Learning at Montgomery County IU. One of the things that I do on the daily is talk about inclusivity. And when we talk about inclusivity, we're really trying to push that topic to be more inclusive. So we're starting to have more conversations about equity. So we're really excited to have this conversation today.
Hi, I'm Carol Grubb, project consultant at the IU as well. My initiatives are behavior, autism, and I've been working on the equity committee for the state. And I'm really excited how equity is playing into our behavior discussions to make it more equitable for all. So I'm excited to hear Shavon and excited to get going.
Greetings. My name is Shavon Norris, and I work in the world as an artist, as an educator, and as a facilitator. I do a lot of different things, but mostly what I'm interested in is finding the ways to help us be in right relationship with ourselves, with each other, and with the natural world. And a lot of that has to do with being intentionally inclusive, being thoughtful about sustainable, equitable services and programs and systems. And how do we want to show up in the world as humans and invite others to show up as well? Yeah.
Awesome. Well, welcome, everybody. This is our first virtual podcast recording. So thank you all for tuning in today. Shavon, the first question's for you. And you gave us a brief history, brief background there, but how do you design learning opportunities? What are those topics that you feel are really important for educators to cover today?
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. A little bit about me. I like to tell humans that I am from the Bronx. I grew up in what I like to call a Christian sci-fi African-American home. So there's lots of magic and miracle, angels and vampires and all of that. So I'm inspired. I am an artist, so I'm inspired by what is impossible and reaching for possibilities. So science and magic and spirituality all play in that. I thought I was going to be a doctor. I majored in biology. I wasn't quite fit for that. 9/11 happened and something happened internally for me. And I was always dancing. So I went to grad school, got an MFA in dance and choreography, worked as a teaching artist at a theater company. I was thrown into the classroom and asked to help teachers find ways to make art and learning part of science and math and history. It was like all of my world in one place. And I was really juiced up by that. And then I worked for 11 years at a Philadelphia charter school. I started off as the dance teacher, and then I became the organizational culture and arts coordinator. And I think that history is really highlights the ways that I like to invite people into learning. So my first couple of years of teaching, I witnessed that the population that was expelled and suspended the most were Black boys. They were the only ones actually being expelled, but they were the ones that were being suspended the most. And I have to be honest, I spent a lot of time in leadership offices, crying and yelling and raging and fussing. I think like my first 3 years was spent and they didn't know what to do with me. So they just started sending me to workshops and to get training. They were like, well, it's a problem for you. We understand. We see it. We know it, but we're trying to do the best that we can. Go get some learning. So I started getting some learning, and the combination of being a movement person and learning and being in a room, like my classrooms didn't have desks. My classrooms didn't have chairs. My classrooms were just the bodies. And I got to experience and learn from the young humans how important being in your body was, how important acknowledging your physical experience, how important that was for bodies that had learning differences, bodies that were under the umbrella of autism, bodies that were Black and brown, bodies that just didn't feel comfortable or fitting in the regular structured classroom. So in my classroom, there was something happening and people started coming to my classroom. And so I started harvesting and cultivating my embodied practices and then offering how do we expand what we're already doing to be more thoughtful and intentional with our students. And I think the things that I'm really interested in offering teachers is so many teachers are spending time learning about social, emotional tools. They're learning about mindfulness. They're learning about trauma-informed practices. They're learning about healing-centered practices. And I find that we're seldom asking them to explore what does emotional look like and feel like, sound like for them? What does their trauma look like? What does their challenge look like? Because we're taking all of that into the classroom and we're requiring students to be mindful, to be aware of their tone, to be aware of their feelings and their bodies, but we're not always mindful and aware ourselves, and we rub up against each other in that way. So I'm interested in inviting teachers and educators to feel and be human and then see what needs to be adjusted and transformed so they can be inclusive and in relationship with their students as opposed to in conflict or challenge or misunderstanding with their students.
So when you say, sorry to follow up on one thing you said, you may have answered my second question, but I'm curious, was it the expulsions? Was that the moment where you felt like inclusivity was needed, or was that just like a piece of a larger, scope of things I think you might have been seeing in those positions?
So thank you for that question, Brandon. I think that it was the most overt thing for me that I was feeling viscerally in my body, that I was having such a hard time. And to be completely honest, I was finding myself talking to the Black and brown boys the way that my colleagues were and having an expectation that they would be different with me. Like I'm being thoughtful. And it was like, but you're still talking to them the same way. You're fitting into this culture. So that was the first moment. I feel like that was the strongest thing that I attached to. But there were definitely other things. There were how classes were structured, how we were having expectations that everyone would be interested in the same topics, right? Like, oh, I taught this and half the class wasn't interested. It's like, well, they don't have any stake in it. It's not relevant for their lives. It doesn't include them. They're not seeing themselves in your classroom, in your textbooks, in whatever you're using. So I think that was my, I feel like the expulsions was how I got thrown into the room. And then when I was in the room, I opened my eyes and started paying some attention to everything else. But that was the initial challenge and shock for me.
Yeah, Jessie, she said something interesting there about the body and the people. And I'm curious if you obviously do a lot of work with mindfulness with the Office of Professional Learning. I'm curious if you had any thoughts or responses to that.
Yeah, one of the things I think we really try hard whenever we talk about mindfulness through our organization is to make people realize that although, yes, we want to get into the classroom practice, it starts with you. If you don't have the awareness, if you don't have the ability to regulate your own emotions, it doesn't matter what you do in the classroom because it doesn't match up. It doesn't come across authentic. So if you sign up for like the Mindful Classroom series and you come in and you work through a curriculum that we put together, it's not about the classroom. It's about you understanding these practices that are research-based, that are have a lot of evidence to support that they have an effect that is worth trying to get. Once you have that awareness, you can start to work on equity. You can start to work on making people feel included. But without that awareness, it's just a conversation. It's a conversation that you may believe in, but you don't have the skill set yourself to do anything with. So that's one of the reasons why we really like the approach that Shavon brings, and that it matches our beliefs as an organization about how to make effective change. And it starts with the people.
I can't help but think of myself in that moment, Shavon, where you're talking about the teacher and how you were behaving just as others and expecting a different result. What popped in my head is I have a 3-year-old and he is doing a great job of being a 3-year-old right now. So I'm like yelling at him to stop yelling. That's just absurd. And I'm sure, Carol, you do a lot of work around this idea because it is behavior, but it's not just learning about the practices, it's engaging in them themselves.
Yes, we talk a lot about vulnerable decision points. And when we're at a state in our own being that we are at our highest need for the vulnerable decision points, we act in a different way when we're engaging with students and staff. We could be having the most horrible morning in the world, and we come in and all of a sudden we have no patience for Johnny, who he knows he's going to test our patience every day, but now we're acting so differently. So taking a break on and giving us a little downtime and a little how can I walk into that classroom every day that everybody is on the same keel? Not Johnny, because I know he's already at a 10 for me, but walking in, being physically able, mentally able to handle every situation in kind of the same way.
Shavon, what do we do next? How do we proceed in the conversation? How do we wrap in inclusion, and how do we address equity? There's a lot going on in the world right now. It is obvious that we have to face this head on, as far as I'm concerned, as an educator. But how do we start that process? And for a lot of people, it is the start. For some of us, we're in the middle of it, but a lot of people are at the starting line. How do we progress?
That's a really big question. I think I love your reference to the start, because I do believe that we're all in different spectrums of where we are in this work. And for those of us that are at the start of it, I would invite them to explore implicit bias. I know that term is out in the world a lot, but I think of implicit bias about what's your peanut butter and jelly? Like, what is that thing that you associate with whenever you hear Black men, Black women, or Black children? What's your peanut butter and jelly? Like the implicit bias that has been ingrained in you, not because you're a bad person, not because you're an evil person, but because you're a human person and the brain is working to make connections. So can you slow yourself down? Practice these things that Carol's talking about. Some of that is breathing. So in those moments, or when Brandon was talking, like your child is 3 and yelling, and your response is to yell back. Can you take a moment and breathe and be in the body so you can see that and respond from there? I feel the same way about implicit bias. So if I know that I have this relationship with, I'm a Black woman, I have implicit bias based on Black women relationships because I'm a really good learner and I learned all of the things from the world that I was supposed to learn. And I grew up in a system that is oppressive and has practices of supremacy. So when I'm looking at another Black woman, can I slow myself down and breathe and be aware and thoughtful and mindful of those things that are operating in me, and do some work to change that and shift that? We know brain science, what's fired together is wired together. So if I can offer my brain another opportunity to explore what Blackness looks like and feels like in my life, I can create some alternatives. I can create some different language. And I think that's where a lot of us can start. Those of us that are in the middle, how do we invite more people into the conversation? How do we hold space for the people that are doing addition? And how do we hold space for the people that are doing neuroscience? I think for schools, I'm going to be really honest. For schools, if we haven't been having these conversations, it's really hard to start. And if you haven't been having these conversations, I think the best thing is to say, we haven't been having this conversation. We really need to start. We really want to start. Because if we just start having them, the bodies that have been suffering don't trust it. They don't trust it. They don't believe in it. And if you don't have a system of moving forward, we're going to have monthly conversations. We are going to have someone available to you. Have to have a plan. You can't ask oppressed bodies to then be in charge of how you learn. So if the structure is willing to set up a plan for those that are in the middle, for those that are in the beginning, the middle, and doing like deep work, they're activated, they're out in the streets, they're talking about radical things. How do you set a system up so all of those people can find access to the conversation? Just like we do in the classroom, we adapt, we modify. How do we set up something that all of those people can find a space and a place to have voice and talk and share, including the students?
I was just going to follow up. I think a huge part of that we need in general when we talk about educational systems is family and student involvement. And how do we pull that in if they have been neglected, if the voice hasn't been upfront and present? How do we build that trust and that bridge to say, look, not only are we wanting to learn, we want to listen and we want to work with you?
Mm-hmm. I think, Brandon, that's the thing that you do. You say how, like, you be transparent about, send a newsletter out to the families, make a video out to the families, say what your intentions are, what you are feeling. You maybe even apologize with, like, it took us a while to get here. We're so grateful that we're here, but we also acknowledge that it took us some time, because that is what builds the trust and that's what builds the relationship. And then give people multiple points of gaining access. We're going to have, during this part of your student's class, if you can join us and we're going to talk about this, can you be present? Because most of us are all in the spaces together right now. So we have immediate access to those bodies. Can we make it so that we're not making it hard for them to be there? And then when they're virtually with us, you want to send it in the chat? Do you want to give them an email address to share? So if they don't feel they can speak it, they can talk it, whatever, there's multiple ways to gain access into that conversation. And then have somebody on the other side that is trying really hard to respond to all of it. Try not to have people being vulnerable and sharing and honest and let the email sit there. Like, maybe it just lands with one person or two people and they help the community process that and offer resources. Yeah.
When I think about inclusivity, it is making sure that our actions, and I think this is one of the reasons, again, that we are working with Shavon, right? Our actions have to match what we're saying. And you do need diverse thought to be best equipped to handle that space and to create those moments. But inclusivity to me is just recognizing that there is no normal. There is no such thing as trying to hit the majority of people by having one action. It is recognizing that everyone is unique and everyone is an individual. That is the massive work that is going to have to sort of take place in our education systems.
Yeah. I agree with so much of what Jessie is saying. And I think of inclusivity as shifting the center, constantly shifting the center, constantly asking us what lens are we looking from? What perspective are we considering? Whose body is being centered? I liken it to, when I do workshops with folks, I put up a picture of Where's Waldo? And we search for Waldo, but in that search for Waldo, right, in that search for that one person, we get to take in so many other bodies. There's so much information coming in, like reading the room in a way that, okay, I'm here, Jessie's here, Brandon's here, Carol's here. Can we consider the other bodies that are not here? Can we acknowledge that we're not representing all of humanity? This is my perspective. How do we call those people into the space? How do we call those experiences into the space? In order for me to be able to do that, I have to do work for my life to expose myself to. I'm curious about the ways that we use diversity and inclusion to. Resma Manikin talks about this. Like, when we say diverse, we're definitely still being white-centered because we're saying diverse from whiteness. We're saying inclusive to mean including more than white voices. I can get with that, but I'm also curious about maybe it's like pluralism or being pluralistic, multiple tongues, a variety of voices being respected and expected to show up and be present, and us holding the space for that. Yeah.
Coming from a special ed lens with inclusive, we talk about inclusive practices all the time. And I think a lot of times instead of looking, we need to look more at the environment and what can we do to this environment so everybody feels included. That environment needs to change in so many ways to make our students feel included, like reading books that aren't Jimmy and Bobby and Billy, reading books of students of other cultures and bringing them to feel more a part of that classroom. Inclusivity is everybody. We always look, I think, to change the kid, as opposed to let's look at the environment and see what's preventing this child from succeeding at his fullest. And I think that's a huge thing for me.
I want to add the environment and what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's us. I'm inviting educators to not blame the kid or not be frustrated with the kid. What needs to shift in that room? What needs to shift in that authority's body, in their voice, in their tone? What are they and not to say like educators are not doing all of the things, but I think for a long time, our educational structures were holding students accountable, and all of the things that we know about the brain and development, those practices have been unfair and unjust. And I'm just really excited for the ways that we are learning how to prioritize them and what they need and have ourselves adjust.
Is that what makes you use terms like insider and outsider? Is that where it comes from? Yes.
A lot of people use mainstream and marginalized to talk about insider, outsider kind of topics. And there's something about mainstream, marginalized that centers whiteness in a way that I want to experience myself as the center. I want to experience myself as being able to move in the ways that I want to move. So I'm interested in language that allows for that. And insider, outsider, for me, it acknowledges that because of my identity, because of my biology, because of the geography where I was born, because of interest, I am in specific groups, right? And then there are groups that I'm just not in. I'm out of them because of choice, interest, values. Like I'm child free. So I don't have an experience as a parent, as a guardian.
What's that like?
It's nice, Brandon. You should try it on.
I love my kids. I'm just kidding.
Right. But there's a way that I can honor my outsiderness and your insiderness without having to feel in conflict about that, without having to feel like that is right and that's wrong. And I think a lot of times when we talk to educators, there's a way that we talk us and them. And I'm interested in revising that and offering some innovation to that and some newness to that. So if I'm the identities and the places that I am in and I understand and I can work in that, when I witness or view or in relationship with someone that is outside of my ends, how can I have curiosity? How can I be courageous about exploring that? How can I have compassion? And insider, outsider also allows us to know that we're not going to know everything. And again, that's okay. We remember that as children, but as adults, we feel in my experience, I witness adults feeling uncomfortable around learning or not knowing, and especially around race, especially around equity, especially around gender and identity. When we don't know, there's so much shame. And, I grew up in a Christian home and we would say things like, tell the truth, shame the devil. And I want to say like, tell the truth and shame the shame. Like if I speak it, if I acknowledge that this is what I'm learning, the shame goes away a little bit. So to acknowledge that we are not in everything and we don't have to expect ourselves to know everything, it feels a little bit more decharged and open. Does that answer your question, Brandon?
Yeah, I think so. I wonder, my next wondering is, does hate and anger around some of these topics or discussions stem from people just lacking the ability to be uncomfortable? And I'll share something. I don't know if we need to go down this road, but I vividly remember, Shavon, the first time I was in a room and I was the only white person and how that felt. I was in Chicago on a trip in high school and I walked into a Walgreens to get some allergy medicine and I was the only white person in there. And it's something that has stayed with me forever. And in that moment, I think it would describe me as an outsider, or I put myself in that box. I didn't feel in danger, but I'll never forget how it felt. You know what I mean? So I'm wondering if it's just some people's response to that of lack of being comfortable. They put outsider, therefore it's wrong. I felt, I don't know.
Yeah, I absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's super vulnerable and honest and helpful. There's a way that privilege prevents some of us from building up discomfort muscle. There's a way that privilege helps us stay unaware of the capacity of our bodies and our spirits and our emotions to be uncomfortable and to be okay. So like if you are a body that is not asked to be the only in a room, if you're a body that you have the expectation, like you walk into the room and there's respect and acceptance and expectation for your fullness of humanity, you don't have the skills and the practice of being uncomfortable regularly. So when you are, it's very, that response to that discomfort is big. So some of us, like we have fight, flight, or freeze, and folks are starting to talk about how there's annihilation added to that. So like if you don't have a practice of responding to your fight, flight, or freeze regularly and figuring that out, that when you do face moments of discomfort, the rage and the discomfort and the anger is far past what a lot of us would consider to be appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Shavon, what can we expect from you coming up in November, I believe? What do we have to look forward to, and what can people hope to gain from our time together?
So we're planning on doing a virtual session with folks in November, and one in December, and one in January, and then having some learning activities happen in between those 3 dates. And Jesse and I talked about that. It's a place of, I love to have these conversations and then give people space and time to feel into it, to be reflective. Like the way that your brain is popping right now, Brandon, like someone says something and then you're traveling back to your childhood, you're reflecting on a book. I really enjoy, as an educator and facilitator, giving folks enough time or some time to actually feel and reflect and self-direct, because they're only going to spend a little bit of time with me. I don't want the learning I don't want it to happen just because I'm present. I'm interested in inviting the spark to be in their body. So whatever the relationship they have with me, they can go about their lives and continue to explore this. I'm setting up the course, the sessions to explore first our bodies and what we've learned and what we've experienced. Some of these stories that you're bringing up, Brandon, those are the type of things that we want to dig into. Our cultural learning, how our homes, our blocks, our neighborhoods affected what we learned and influenced how we are showing up in the room. None of us learned in a vacuum. And then the second part of that is going to be about how can we use that information and do this thing what Carol mentioned, and shift the environments in our classrooms to use this self-awareness and make it more applicable, and understand that is going to change. Jesse is talking about learning about these things and having it change over like years, right? Like ask us about inclusivity next year, Brandon, and see what we say. So like how to allow for the classroom to shift and their practices to shift and open that up a little bit. And then the third one is going to be like, how do they show up in the world? How do we use this information? I'm thinking of like concentric circles going out, first with the body, then with the classroom. And then can we participate a little bit more in an informed way in our schools, in our districts, in our communities, in our neighborhoods? The hardest thing I'm finding for people is to have these conversations with family, especially when the family member has a point of view that is divergent from theirs. And this is someone that you love. And probably the reason why you thought the things that you did before you started learning this work. And how do you invite them? I'm curious about offering some tools to have family members be able to have conversations that don't dismantle us, but offer some compassion and some curiosity and some healing. So first body, classroom, and then outside of us. That's my plan.
Love it. Well, thank you once again for joining us, Jesse and Carol. It's very nice to see your faces as we're still operating remotely through our COVID-19 experience. But Shavon, it has been an absolute joy to get to know you. I hope we can do this again, maybe after second session or something midwinter. Okay. You're just a pleasure to speak with, so thank you for that. For everybody else out there, again, as I said, we have a bunch of work coming down this pipeline this year that really addresses these issues, and we're really excited about them. As I said, Tyrone Howard's coming up on October 14th. We have these sessions Shavon highlighted. This is where education needs to start. I just feel that way. We need to be the start of this. I'm just so grateful, Jesse, that you've introduced me to this fine woman. Once again, everybody, this is the OPL Podcast. If you are a school district, a teacher, and there's a topic you think we should be covering or you'd like to come on the show, please reach out to me. I'd love to have our local Montgomery County schools represented, and we'd love to be highlighting the great work that you are all doing through this pandemic. I'm seeing a lot of it on Twitter. It really is impressive, and there's just a lot of love out there in a very difficult time. So with that, I'll wish you the best, and we will see you all next time. Thank you.